Hello and welcome to the fifth webcast in our series of how-to guides on the RapidDeploy version 4.0 basics, and today I'm going to look at installing WebSphere onto a Linux server from scratch. I'm going to be using Amazon Web Services for this, so I've already pre-configured an AWS instance and it's running, and I've installed Java on it. And that brings us to the prereqs for this demo, which are that you must have a Linux server to run this deployment on. It should have Java at least 1.6 already installed. You should have RapidDeploy downloaded and running. And you'll also need access to the IBM download site to enable you to download the IBM Installation Manager, which is something that will be done as part of this demo. So in this demo I'm going to cover three projects. The first one is going to be the Installation Manager install project, and this project will allow us to install the Installation Manager on any of our targets, downloading it from the IBM site. The second project will be a binary install project of Websphere and D network deployment, and what that will do is it will pull down the Websphere and D binaries at the version we choose. It will install those binaries, and then we're going to create a deployment manager and a node agent profile, and we're going to federate the node agent to the deployment manager, and we're also going to configure security. So it's kind of WAS ND in a box. And then the third project, we will deploy the JPetstore application. So we'll create a cluster and create all the configuration around that cluster, deploy JPetstore, and at the end we'll show that we can log into that JPetstore app. Okay, so let's go ahead and log into RapidDeploy. Usually, if you've just installed RapidDeploy, the username will be mvadmin and the password will be mvadmin, although you probably ought to change that as soon as possible. So this is an empty RapidDeploy instance. So the first thing I'm going to do is download those projects from our website. So if you go to portal.midvision.com and you then go to the RapidDeploy menu, you'll see that you can download here RapidDeploy, which is what I've just done. And then you can go into the example RapidDeploy projects. And we've covered all of these first projects in earlier webcasts. So now I'm going to download the IBM Installation Manager. You can read a little more here about how this demo project works, but I'll leave that for you after this demo. You can have a look at that. But I'm just going to click and download that. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the binary install. I'm just going to click and download that as well. And then I'll do the same thing for the configure and install the application. Okay, so they're all downloaded. So we'll go back into RapidDeploy and we'll go to Resources, Projects, and we're just now going to upload this project, the very first one. So the Installation Manager Install Linux 40. Open that. I'm going to import it. We keep all these things the same. The only thing I'm going to change is I've actually installed RapidDeploy in this location, rd/midvision. So I'm going to use that as the root for my directories. I'll leave the other settings the same. Okay, let's import this project. Okay, so we've got this project. Let's go into it. Okay, first of all, let's take a quick look at the orchestration. So the first thing we're doing is getting the IBM installer from the IBM site. You can see here we've got two data dictionary items, the user ID and the password. And I've set those to be blank data dictionary items, so we'll get prompted for those when we actually run this job. And the reason I did that is because, of course, you will have your own credentials for logging onto the IBM site. I just want to make it easy for you to put those in at deployment time and not have to configure anything. Now here we also have the remote URL. You can see this is quite a long, convoluted URL, and this is provided by the IBM download site when you log in and go to select your download that you want to install, and this unfortunately will change every time you log into the IBM site, so you're probably going to have to change this remote URL yourself. You'll have to log into the site, find the download page for the IBM Installation Manager, and then when it says download, you need to right click, save the link and add it into this remote URL here. And if you go to the project on our demo site, Installation Manager Install Linux 40 project, we've got the link there to the correct page where you can select the download manager, and then when you click on the link, just save the link into this remote URL location. Then we've got a copy task to move it into a location. The reason I'm doing this is to make sure that once we've downloaded the installer, we don't actually download it again on this server. So we're doing a check to make sure that it'll only re-download it if a newer version is detected. Then we've got some yum tasks here to update the operating system. Then we are enabling some extras. Then we're installing some libraries. And then this is an interesting task. What we're doing here is we are getting the 32-bit architecture by running this command here. And we're storing this in this output parameter, $arch32bit. And we can use this output parameter in any of our later tasks in any fields. So where we've got this yum install 32-bit libs, we're actually using this arch32 here. In fact, it's mentioned several times in this command line. Then we're installing the zip utility and the unzip utility, IP tables, some psmisc package, and then we're just really making the opt-IBM Installation Manager directory. Okay, so we also have a target pre-configured here. So called it the AWS Linux sudo midvision wasnd target. I'm going to go and look at that. And you can see that this will have it's actually already got a host name in there. That of course won't be right. So I'm going to add the correct host name in here with the host name of the AWS instance that I've just created that has Java on it. Okay, so that's the actual host. So I'm going to add that, and I'm going to remove the previous host, and I'm going to save that. Okay, so let's now go back to the project. Now what we need to do is create a package to deploy. So let's create that package. Okay, so we've got this first package created. It's quite quick. There's very little actually in it. So now we can run a job. So we're going to go to Installation Manager Install Linux. We're going to select the version that we've just created. I'm going to go next. And you'll see now that it says late properties remain to be configured. So we're going to click on this. And this is where we need to enter the username and password to make the connection to the IBM website. Okay, so I'm going to use a username and password that I've got pre-configured here. I accept those, and I'm just going to skip to finish, and I'm going to start running this job. Okay, so this is going to begin by deploying the jar files that are necessary for this installation to the target server. See these file transfers. This orchestration jar is quite large, so it might take a little while. Then this is transferring the orchestration, which is the steps that we're running on this target. This is the installation manager install. It's got this injected at the end because we've entered some late properties that we've injected into the jar file, and then it's going to run through all of the tasks that we need to do the deployment. Okay, if we just really go back to the project now for a second, and I just wanted to show you that where we'd configured in this task the IBM username and password, you see we've configured those with data dictionary items. If we actually go over onto the data dictionary, you can see that this is blank. This is actually blank as well, but it's showing us stars because it's password masked. Then if we go onto the target, we go and look at that target and we look at the data dictionary items, we can see that those two data dictionary items are in fact empty, and that's what prompts the late properties to be requested at this time. Okay, so now let's go ahead while that's running and install our next project. So I'm now going to upload the Websphere and D install Websphere and D project. And again, we're just going to need to change these paths to my path that I've got installed here. Don't need to configure anything else. Okay, I'll import this project. Okay, so now we've got our second project, and this is going to install the binaries for Websphere and D onto the target. And if we just go and have a quick look at this project, have a look at the orchestration, we can see that once again we're adding in the IBM credentials. Again, we're using data dictionary items. We're then running this IBM Installation Manager execute command task, telling it where we want the installation to happen on the target server. We're telling it the command to run, which is install. You've got some other commands you can run. There's some help here to tell you. The package ID is again a data dictionary item, and this will be specified differently for each of the targets we've got, because each target in this project is configured as a different version of Websphere and D. And again, we've got the repository URL. So we'll go and have a look at what those values are set to. And then removing the IBM credentials, because we don't want to leave those on the target. We're then creating a deployment manager profile. So we can choose to create either a deployment manager profile or an AppServer profile, or we can create both, as I'm doing in this case, to create Websphere in a box, which is the deployment manager and the AppServer on the same box. So we give this some various values. You can go and look at these. Clearly we need a profile path, the name of the cell we're going to create, the node name of the deployment manager node, the Websphere host, the admin username and admin password that will be set up for security, the starting port for this profile, etc. Okay, then we're going to secure the SOAP client props. So we're going to add the username and password into the SOAP client props file. We're also going to change the initial heap size that will be run whenever using wsadmin commands and the SOAP timeout. We're then going to create the nodeagent profile. It's very similar to the deployment manager profile, but we're just using a different template, now using the manage template. We then start the deployment manager server so that we can federate the nodes, and we then run the node federation operation. Okay, and so by the time we've finished with this project, we should have a deployment manager configured, a node agent configured, the node agent configured to the deployment manager, and security enabled, and an update to the SOAP client props file. So let's have a look at the data dictionary here. You see we've got more values entered here. We've got the admin username and admin password, and we're just setting these to wasadmin and wasadmin. We've got the blank IBM ID and password again, because we're going to need to connect in again to download the binaries. The package ID set to this, so it's a WAS855 package, and the repository URL. So let's go ahead now and have a look at the targets for this project. And as you can see, we've actually got quite a lot of targets here, and these are all different versions of WebSphere. So when we looked at the orchestration and we looked at the data dictionary items, we saw that we were actually setting this for 855, but we've got lots of different versions here. If we go and have a look at, say, the WAS 80010, we look at the data dictionary, we'll see that the IBM ID and the IBM password are empty because we're going to prompt for those at deployment time. The WAS host is also empty because we're going to prompt for that at deployment time. The username and password of the WebSphere cell, we're just going to leave the same for every deployment in this case, so we're inheriting those from the project scope. And we've overridden the package ID and the repository URL to these values here, representing the different version of WebSphere that we're installing. Okay. So you could choose any one of these and install a different version of WebSphere onto your target when you run through this demo project. Yeah, but I'm going to use the 855.8, I believe, version. Okay, so let's now create a package. So we've got our package, and we can now go ahead and deploy that. Oops. So here now I can choose any of the versions that I wanted. I'm going to choose the 855.8. I'm going to go skip to finish and next. And again, we've got to inject those late properties. So we've entered those, we'll accept that, go to next, and we'll run start job. Okay, so once again this is going to connect over to the target. Deploying the jar file should now be very quick because it's going to do a check on the checksum of the jar files, and if they've not changed it won't recopy them over. So that's quite quick to happen. So now it's going to add the credentials, run the installation. Now it's doing the installation, which is going to copy the binaries onto the target server. And so we'll let that run. And what we'll do now while that's running is we will add the third project. Oops. We'll upload the third project, should I say. Okay, so this is the configure deploy JPetstore. Leave those the same, and again we just need to add my directory in here, and you'll have to do the same thing wherever you've installed RapidDeploy. You'll just need to change the part that points to the root directory. Okay, we'll import this project. Okay, so we can go and take a look at this project. Let's have a look at the orchestration. So what we're going to do here is, this project's got an EA file in it, the JPetstore here. What we're going to do is, before we do the install, we're going to expand that EA file out, and we're going to, which you can use with this task here, and then we're going to search and replace inside that EA file. We're going to look at HTML files, and we're going to change this key, welcome to JPetstore 6, to welcome to JPetstore 6, followed by the app name that we're configuring. So this will give a unique title to the JPetstore, depending on which environment we're in. And in fact, we've configured a test environment, so this will say test or something like that for the app name. I'll show you that in a moment. We're then going to collapse the EA file back up into the JPetstore here. We're going to stop any cluster that's running. Now, the first time we deploy this, there won't be any cluster, so this will just say there isn't a cluster, so it can't stop it. But for subsequent deployments, this will stop the cluster prior to doing the deployment. We're then going to run the WebSphere deployment task. We'll look at this again in more detail in a minute when we come to look at the environment. But we're going to install the application, we're going to install the cluster, we're going to install JDBC providers, and we're going to install resource. We're not going to install resource adapters, but we are going to install virtual hosts. Now, there are many settings you can choose here for installation. We've only got 6 detailed here. The rest you can set actually in the file that controls what it is that you're going to deploy. And then finally, we've got an integrity check script, which is going to just check that the deployment works successfully by making a curl call to the application to make sure that we get a valid response. Okay, so now let's go and have a look at the files in this project. And the files we've got, look at the script first. So this is the integrity check script. It's really just making a call to the localhost 10,030, which will be the connection port for the Websphere AppServer running when that's been installed. And that's just making a curl call to make sure we get a correct response code. You see here. Then in the J2EE directory, we've got the JPetstore EA file. And this is the file that we're actually going to be deploying. Okay, and then if we go and have a look at the targets, again, we're on the same server, so we have the same server defined as we did before. The environment is test. Let's go and have a look at that. So if we look at the product, what we've configured here is the path to the deployment manager, the path to the wsadmin.sh, which is the path to deployment manager bin wsadmin.sh, and the path to the earexpander.sh, which we'll need to expand and collapse the EA file and run the deployment. The most important part here is the deployment configuration. So this was created from a template, and you can see in other of our webcasts how to create templates. So this is the framework of exactly what we are deploying. You can see that all the values are set to data dictionary items. So this is an auto-generated file, but once it's been generated, you can manually modify it and save changes to it over time. And so if we go back to the project, there's some of the settings you can set here, key store, paths and so on for connecting to the server. If we go back to the project, and we go and look at the targets, and we can then go and have a look at the values that are set. So those values that you saw in that Python area on the environment were generated automatically from this template. So this is sort of an easy way of sort of visualizing the same thing, where we've got the cell name, the deployment manager root, for example, and all the settings that we want to set for this target environment. I'm not going to go through all of these, they're sort of standard WebSphere things, but you can choose to enable or disable different things. And there are different templates for doing different things. This is what we call the standard template, so it covers the main things that you would want to do when deploying a web app into WebSphere. Okay, if you want to look at those just in terms of the data dictionary values, you can do that here. You can see that all of them are saved as data dictionary values. Let's make this bigger. You can see that the app name has been overridden. Now remember, the app name was the setting that we set on the orchestration that we were going to put in the title. So it will now also have in square brackets JPetstore test. You can see there are some empty values that we'll need to complete at deployment time. Cell name has been overridden, and of course some JDBC settings. You can quickly see what's sort of taking the standard setting and what's been overridden. Okay, so let's just go back to running jobs for a second. Okay, so that previous job completed. So in theory now, we should actually be able to connect to the WebSphere server and go and take a look and see if everything's there correctly as we'd expect. So let's open a new tab. We'll enter the URL. This is the host name of the Amazon server that I originally set up. We set the port to be 28,000, the starting port, so it'll be 28,001 will be the admin console secure port. So we'll try and connect to that. Okay, and we set the username and password to be wasadmin. And so here we have the application server, it's all configured. Go to system administration and look at the nodes. Hopefully we should have 2 nodes. Yep, so we've got the deployment manager and the node agent both running on the same host, and they're both synchronized. Okay, so that's good, but at the moment we shouldn't have any applications. So if we go into servers, server types, WebSphere application servers, then at the moment we don't see anything. Okay, so now we're going to run the third project to actually deploy something into this cell. Let's go back into our project. And the first thing we need to do is create a package. I'll just refresh that. And we've got our package to deploy. So let's go ahead and deploy that. So we're running on the same server, test environment. We've only got one package. Skip to finish. And then of course we have got some late config properties. I'm going to just accept these. I don't need to actually set any of these. Now we don't need the IBM ID and password because we don't need to connect to the IBM website, and we don't need to worry about the host. That's all internal. And we'll just run that job. And again, we don't need to copy the jar files, there's no issue with that. The only new jar file that we're copying is this JPetstore jar file. That is a 7.9 megabytes, so it might take it a moment or two to copy over. You can always look at the logs in real time down at the bottom here. See the copies taking place. Okay, so now we're running through the initialization task. And this is doing the search and replaces on all of those data dictionary items to all of the files underneath that project to make sure that everything has its correct environment specific value mapped. Now we're expanding the EAR file, making the changes and collapsing it. That's very quick. The cluster's now being stopped. Of course, there isn't actually a cluster to stop, so that will happen very quickly. And now we're actually doing the WebSphere deployment. So this is now going through and doing the deployment. It should be relatively quick. We're not actually doing a great deal. We're creating a cluster, creating a virtual host, creating an AppServer, putting it onto that cluster, and then we'll be starting the AppServer up as part of that deployment. So this, now you can see here, it's actually deploying the WAR file. It's doing the synchronization, so it's synchronizing the node and deployment manager. It's doing a distribution status check now. So what that means is it's checking that that EAR file has in fact been correctly synchronized. Now that would be quite quick because we're doing all this on one box, but the way we've configured the RapidDeploy WebSphere framework to work is if you've got many distributed nodes, it will check until all of those nodes have received the EAR file or WAR file and are fully synchronized before going on to the next step, which of course is usually to then start that application server, and that's exactly what's happening here. We're starting the cluster. The cluster's been started, and now we're finished. So we can go and have a look at that whole log if we wish by clicking on the magnifying glass, or you can download the log file to your desktop. So you can always go back and review the log and see what happened. It's quite verbose logging. You can see all of the tasks, it's all quite clearly highlighted. So this is the actual WebSphere deployment taking place here. So it's setting some variables, virtual host, object request broker, web container settings, ports being configured, log files, log settings, Websphere data sources, install the application and then start it up. So it's starting up here. Okay, excellent. Well, let's now go back into WebSphere. I'm just going to actually log out and log back in because WebSphere, when you make a lot of changes, often doesn't properly update. And when we log back in, we go to servers, WebSphere application servers. You can see we now have that cluster 01 clone 1 running. We can look at the cluster, of course. Expect to see the cluster there. You should also see the application. We've created this, we called it JPetstore test. It's been created with the app name. Okay, we look in environment, we should see a virtual host. This is the virtual host we created, cluster 01. Okay. So now, if we take this host name and we connect to 10,030, which is what we call, which is the port that we have used for the JPetstore, we should see that this is running. Okay, it's a horrible yellow color. I apologize for that. The reason for that is because one of the later demos that we do is we show how we change the background and how we use continuous delivery to deploy that change, so application change, through various different environments, and we use a yellow and a grey background. But you can see we've got JPetstore running, and this is the JPetstore test, which was the app name, which was the data dictionary item that we used to search and replace inside the EAR file before we did the deployment, showing that not only can we change configuration in different environments, but we can also actually change bits of the application that we have access to by expanding the EAR file on the fly, making changes and earing it back up again. Okay, so at that point we've completed the demo for this webinar, and what I propose to do in the next webcast in this series is to go through continuous delivery. So we'll look at this same JPetstore application with this same test environment. But what we'll do is we'll clone that to two other environments, a development environment and a production environment, and we will link this to Subversion, and we will use Jenkins as our continuous integration server, and we'll show how making a change to the application, we can make that change and deploy that change through all of those environments into production. So thank you for listening. Please feel free to go and download these projects yourself and follow through this demo again, or just read up on it on our website and see how you get on with deploying to Websphere. Thank you.